My name is Katie Boswell. I'm a managing director at KPMG, and I have the pleasure of leading our AI security services. That means helping our clients establish and maintain trust in their AI solutions so they can enable their business. I'm joined by Christy Hornlin, who is a director. She is absolutely the brains on the ground with our clients, helping them address their real challenges so that they can adopt AI in a way that takes risk into account from the very beginning all the way through to implementing and uplifting their tech stack. So we are really pleased to be here with you today. I guess we can jump right into it. Let's see. I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on the agenda, but the idea is that we are going to talk to you guys about internal and external risks. We are going to talk about our own KPMG experience and what that has meant for a large organization. We're going to talk about our trusted AI approach to security, talk about overall security journey and what that looks like for real organizations. Christy and I have the pleasure of working with some of the largest organizations in the world to help them do this. So our goal today is to just have a conversation with you guys and share some of what we've learned. So hopefully you can take that back to your organizations and put that into practice. And of course, if we have time at the end, Q&A. So we thought we would start off talking about risks because you guys have heard a lot about the exciting things that you can do with AI. Chances are good someone within your organization is already using AI. One of the biggest challenges that we've seen is that most organizations, just like they don't have a really solid CMDB, they do not have a very solid understanding of where they are using AI and where it is making business decisions for them. So we have classified risks into internal risks and considerations and the external risks and considerations. And no, it's not necessarily black and white. There's some very gray area in between. So when we think about the internal risks, we are thinking about things like breaking of confidentiality. We are thinking of things like talent implications. One of my favorite examples here around talent implications is if you are using AI to enable your SOC and you are going to take your level 1 SOC analyst duties and you are going to have it done by AI, what is the risk that your level 2 SOC analysts understand enough of what they need to in order to be the right human in the loop to triage and understand and oversee those level 1 SOC analyst functions. So that is a real risk that you need to think of. Just one example as you are figuring out where to integrate AI into your business and what that means from a risk perspective. We have other risks that are probably pretty obvious to you guys, like employee misuse. If you guys remember Samsung and those developers putting some code into a LLM prompt, they then took their information and their code and they sent it out there into the wide world, not understanding the risks that were there and what that might mean for their hard work. In terms of external risks, some of those might include things like copyright, adversarial attacks, information bias and discrimination. Discrimination is something that we see very much. It's a topic that I'm sure all of you guys have thought of. We are going to touch a little bit on some of the ethical considerations that, yes, you guys as security professionals should understand. Christy, anything you want to add to this?
I think too, just understanding that as we go through the flow here, there's a lot of dependencies on other groups. So the way that we also see it with a good example would be like the IT/OT convergence, having to work cross-functionally and really engage with data scientists as you're walking through or engage with, like we have copyright up there, IP, counsel, all of those sort of intentional group and collaboration pieces we'll touch on, but keeping that in mind as we're looking internal and external beyond simply looking at only, say, the OWASP top 10, but making sure that that's also converted into language that's going to make it really clear as to why we need to get greater transparency. But that's all I'd add there.
And with bringing these groups together, we're going to touch a little bit on this. That's how you're going to be able to address these risks to enable your business. We're not saying, hey, these risks mean that you should not move forward with AI. What we're saying is you need to understand your business's unique use of AI and what that means from a risk perspective. You need to bring the right people together in order to move forward, to enable you to move forward and adopt these AI business cases at the speed that you need to. As we've seen a few times throughout, bad actors, they are not held up by enterprise risk management practices, right? They are allowed to go out there and figure out how to use AI against us. we can't wait, right? We need to be able to move at speed. And unfortunately, in most big organizations, that's a challenge. So the KPMG Trusted AI Framework, I'm sure you guys have heard of other frameworks, like Microsoft has their own responsible AI framework. We hear very much the industry term responsible AI. As KPMG was looking at how we were going to get AI in the hands of all of our consultants, that was a big challenge, right? I don't know about you guys, but at KPMG, hopefully none of my KPMG leadership team is listening, but the reality is that it took a pandemic to get us teams, right? So most of us had no real expectation that we were going to get AI in our hands at the speed that we needed to. And the firm absolutely proved us wrong. They leaned fully into AI and AI adoption and getting AI in the hands of practitioners. And they listened to us and our opinions about the use of AI, which was really significant for us because it enabled us to start using these tools. Unfortunately, what we found was there were some challenges, as with most organizations. And so when we took a step back and we looked at the overall responsible AI framework, what we found is it didn't cover all of the areas that were really key to our business. So one that I'm going to call out here, and I'm not going to try to read the slide to you, right? But one of the key areas was around sustainability. KPMG is very big on sustainability. We publish metrics around how sustainable we are. We track our CO2 emissions every time we have to get on a plane and fly out somewhere to help a client. So this was something that we really needed to bring into the core of our AI strategy. We're going to talk about AI strategy here in a minute. So that led us to stepping back and looking at the overall approach to responsible AI and what we as an organization needed to consider. Now, Christy and I are security professionals. We focus on that night and day. So our talk today is really going to laser focus in on security and privacy. But I wanted to call this out because I think it's important that all of you know that as security practitioners, you cannot address security in a vacuum and truly enable your business or reduce risk. You need to think about things like bias. You need to think about being able to explain the output of your AI. Your consumers, even if they are internal consumers of your AI, they're going to want to know that, and you are going to need to consider that. So that's why we have this up here. I believe all of this will be available to you afterwards. I encourage you to take a look. You might find something here that you think to yourself, oh, wow, this actually does play into security, and I need to be aware of this. And I have found it very helpful to our clients to help them think about this, even when I'm talking to just the CISO's org. So I said we would talk a little bit about strategy. One of the things Christy and I are here to do today is to help all of you understand where we're seeing organizations be successful. Because I have to be honest, we see a lot of organizations struggling with AI adoption and how to make that happen. And so AI strategy is one of the areas where we see organizations coming together and actively understanding what do they need to do within their security strategy, and how does that play into their larger enterprise AI strategy? Again, we don't see organizations successfully being siloed, right? When you have cybersecurity people who aren't speaking to data scientists and vice versa, there we see stall. There we see delay in being able to move to market with these business cases. Christy, I'm going to talk about the input and enablement a little bit, but is there anything you want to say about strategy and in your experience working with our clients, how this is impacting them like real time?
Yeah, I mean, Katie and I also facilitate the AI Security Working Group with the Global Resilience Federation, which has MITRE's involvement. We have large tech companies involved, and a lot there comes from the standpoint of enablement. So the purpose of security there is to go faster to market, which is very interesting because it puts them in a position of being a champion, both from a security standpoint, a safety standpoint. When Katie was hitting on earlier, like you really have to think about yourself as complementing. It's coming from the perspective of we understand that we have to report on some of these risks and we have to really understand our role. But at the end of the day, security is not the one deciding what data goes into the training data set. However, they are responsible for controlling the security safeguards around it, and understanding that, conversing, being in kind of an alliance collectively has also shifted a little bit of like CISO's positions as well as security practitioners' positions in a really interesting way. But I think we'll probably touch on that more throughout.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see from the audience, how many of you have visibility into your AI strategy, whether it's like big organizationally wide or just within the securities org? You guys feel like you have good visibility into that? Not a lot of hands.
We got one down.
What?
We got one down.
Oh, a thumbs down. Yeah. Okay, maybe I'll phrase it a different way. How many of you feel like you could be better security practitioners within your organization if you understood your AI security strategy, or if you even know if you have one? Yeah. It's first of all, you guys are not alone. And I hope you can understand. And one of the reasons why Christy and I thought that this was important stuff to talk about is that, again, like, we can't move at speed within these large organizations if we don't have a strategy. And that strategy really needs to be led, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, from the top down. You can't have practitioners who are primarily concerned with, let's say, owning tool sets, defining how you're going to use those tools. First, you need a strategy. You need to understand risks. So this slide here is meant to represent the strategy. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the input to the strategy. These are all of the things that we have seen after speaking with many clients be really key to establishing that strategy. So some of it is it's really obvious, right? You need to understand where you have AI. Again, that's a big problem for most of the organizations that we're speaking with. And I'm not just talking about those organizations that have just gotten excited about the use of Gen AI. I'm talking about organizations that have been using AI for many years, big life sciences companies, big oil companies, companies that AI is like at the heart of their business. Even they don't have a great understanding of where all of their AI is or what it is. Another is the AI ecosystem. So having an understanding of where these things live. Are you primarily using AI in Azure? Are you using it in another cloud tenant? Are you doing things locally? Are you using tools like GitHub? Are you using security tools like Hidden Layer? What all is involved in your AI ecosystem? Because I don't know about you, but many of my clients are not interested in necessarily piling on a lot of additional technology and software. They want to maximize what they already have. In order to do that, you need to understand what you're using. Regulations, that's a big one. I think Christy is probably going to touch a little bit in a minute on regulations, but understanding the regulations that exist now, because yes, there are regulations that exist now that impact our use of AI, but also understanding where the regulation is going and where your business is going. Where do you want to be with AI use, not just a year from now, but 5 or 10 years? Is it a critical piece of your business? And if so, do you have visibility into the regulations that are going to impact what AI you're able to use? The last one here is probably our favorite because, as Christy said, we work with the Global Resilience Federation. If you're not familiar with them, they're like the parent organization over all of the ISACs. So they're all about peer sharing. And through that, these public-private peer sharing initiatives, we get to work with organizations like NYU, MITRE, CISA, Wells Fargo, Johnson & Johnson. They're all published online, and we get to pull together that information. And then these organizations get to take and understand what their peers are doing and go out and apply that where it makes sense to their own business. So really encourage each of you to understand where opportunities are to lean in within your industries and understand what your peers are doing. That is just such a game changer. Anything else you want to say about public-private peer sharing and like where you've seen it lead to some real impact in organizations?
I mean, I think at the very beginning of the day, Sven was talking about really the availability of a lot of this information, the Cloud Security Alliance, when you're looking at the folks part of the OWASP AI Security Working Group. All of these groups have really spun up so much information, so many different guides. And from our perspective, that's where we see a lot of the visibility shared and where you're not starting at this from net zero. So there's a lot of that I'll touch on that you can use as really resources. But I think that's where the value comes from. And when we talk about like risk indicators, a lot of those things are really issues that we already had that are just further proliferated by the usage of AI and the availability. So a lot of those things come down to what are we leveraging that already exists? How can we make it complementary? And then carving out the few things that you do need to add in specific for probabilistic AI.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, I was talking about the strategy earlier and how important it is that the top of the organization comes together around the strategy. You know, where we've seen organizations be successful are, yes, of course, where the CISO is engaged. We know that that is really key and very essential to AI enablement, but also you need to involve usually a chief privacy officer, legal and compliance. We've seen the CFO come to the table with us to help define an AI strategy. And when you can articulate to them why this is so important, they will come together. If you say, hey, security doesn't need to be a blocker here. We can be an enabler of AI adoption. But in order to do that, there are some key things that we need to be able to do. And that's the right-hand side of this slide. So Corey before us touched on the importance of security awareness. Security awareness can be very ineffective. But right now, one of the key differences with AI is now it is not just in the hands of data scientists who understand where the output of that AI came from, but it's in the hands of all types of users within our organizations who don't necessarily understand what it means to be using that tool and what are the risks associated with it. So if you understand all of the input to your strategy, you can create a security and awareness program and integrate it with what you have. Because what we're talking about here is not creating all kinds of net new processes. We're talking about uplifting what you currently have from policies and procedures to processes in order to make sure that you're addressing any risks that AI may have introduced, whether it was now or whether it was years ago when your organization first started using AI. So we talked a little bit before about the AI security framework. Having a framework that has been customized to your organization's needs means that you all have a great understanding of what you need to do from a risks and controls perspective. I know that it's not the most fun part of being a security professional to worry about these frameworks, but it does make sure that we have a map as to what our organization needs, because then we can do something about it. Then we can take action. Then we have AI security pipeline management. This is where the tool stack starts to come into play. We've seen organizations bring in tools, both like uplifting their use of current tools like Azure. We've seen some new tools integrated in like Hidden Layer, which is now available in Azure. Azure is basically a hub now to be able to monitor models that sit in GCP and AWS. So looking at like, what do you already have that you might be able to maximize? And then what do you need to potentially add to your security stack to make sure that you have some visibility into what's happening with your models? And then finally, the last section is AI security uplift. What do you need to do? Do you need to do red teaming? Do you have an AI enabled chatbot that's out there with your customers? Are you testing that to make sure that those prompts cannot be easily manipulated? Are you doing the work? And what are you going to do when something goes wrong? I'm sure Christy is going to talk a little bit about resiliency, but what do you do if all of a sudden an AI model has become essential to you being able to perform a business function and all of a sudden it's not available? Do you have the resiliency to be able to go and address that and operate or change to a manual process or a backup process? So all of that is centered to the strategy. And again, bringing together the right people to make decisions about that strategy are how you're going to be able to actually action and enable the enablement section. What did I miss?
Well, I mean, we've already got asset management on lock, so how could AI be any different, right?
Absolutely.
But I think from the only other thing that I would say is like, depending on the industry that you're in, certain parts of this may also be part of your process, but it's really disseminating it. I'll bring up the example of financial services have SR 11.7, which really focus on an inventory, but that definition of models is something that is continuously being evaluated when they're now approaching to how are we establishing awareness or control over our collective inventory. So as you're looking out and specifically thinking about your organization, some of these things may exist, and particularly to the ISACs that Kate was talking about earlier, some specific industry ISACs have actually published materials on this that you could use as enablement as well.
Absolutely. So many good resources out there.
So just functionally speaking, from a journey perspective, we're going to make it as kind of baseline here as you can imagine and call out a few specific steps. This is really to give just a visual idea of what we see organizations moving through. Katie talked about really the collective or how many different parts of the organization get engaged from the point of the very forefront of really understanding a good use case, which is usually something that they're using as idea generation. They have lines of business that have found a good reason for them to actually leverage some of these technologies or third-party vendors. And we're going to take you through the process of how we evaluate the risk and how we also are consolidating that information to apply specific security controls. So really, I think the first thing to step into is from an intake perspective. This is a lot of stuff on this slide. So don't burn your eyes reading this. But from the standpoint of one of the biggest problems that Katie was talking to is really visibility. As we talk to organizations, the very forefront is actually many more parties than just security trying to understand this inventory. So we've called out a few ideas of some of the things that we capture across these request forms. And I do want to bring at the very forefront that because people are so excited about AI, raise of hands, who's heard of AI washing? Is anyone familiar with that term? I see one hand. AI washing is when you are declaring that you're using AI, but you are not actually using AI, which is something in itself, a little bit of branding, a little of the snake oil touched on earlier. So we've actually found not only is the intake form where we're initially evaluating a use case and talking about some of the details that might be captured in here, the types of data, the types of end users, really from the perspective of, is this even AI or is this RPA? Is this automation? And by establishing that, we're saving the time because at this point in time, we see a lot of organizations having to understand the risk specific to the type of model or the type of licensing agreement that they have and having different people at the table. So this is almost like the first gate barrier where you'd be able to see and start to indicate this is going to have an impact on my security team is what I'd pull away from that from a security lens. And by this, it allows us to then step into bringing forward a more detailed view to what is established as a steer co. As we put up there are a few groups that tend to be involved in this. We went as broad basing as you can imagine. So some of these may not exist in your organization, but they are people that are represented by different titles, but having folks like from legal, having folks from security, privacy at the table, model risk management, if you do have that within your organization, your architecture group, your product team, your strategy team. The reason that we bring all of these together to review and approve is security's lens is really around what's the type of data, what's the impact. Again, Katie mentioned resiliency. Is this something that we would have as a business critical process? And are we prepared for that? There are a lot of use cases. I'm Canadian, so I'm very familiar with the Air Canada lawsuit that went on, basically favoring an individual that got some guidance on a policy and actually got a refund. Meanwhile, the particular agent that they had enhanced was providing some misrepresentative guidance to them. So some of those things, that's why we have multiple people at the table today. Establishing a charter so that you actually have formal roles and responsibilities associated with this. Katie and I have been working on these problems with organizations where you have security teams that want to do the right thing, you have privacy teams that want to do the right thing, but because they don't have any sort of kind of code of the different lines of defense that they have here, there's nothing really to force people to be accountable. And we're at a point with regulation where a lot of organizations are more proactive in their stance if they're doing this and rather solely going off of the EU AI Act or solely going off of some of the smaller areas that are coming out. We do tend to see organizations as well as they're going through what's that intake and risks to our organization aligned to what are our principles. So Katie shared our principles from a KPMG perspective. Those are things that you can find from frontier developers. You can find them from large organizations that are embedding AI in the products or services that they offer. And as we kind of look at that, it helps us narrow down what are the particular controls that we need to put over rather than trying to just do everything all at once for every layer of use case. And then finally, this all comes back around into, as we've established all of these representations, all of these pieces, your principles of responsible AI, then what are those risk management pieces that are going to feed into, again, the risk assessment that then feeds into the types of controls that we need to apply. Anything that I missed there, Katie?
Well, I just want to call out how important that AI governance body is. So that's where it maps back to having a strategy that people can come together around. If you know what your organization is, what risk you're willing to take on, that's where we get, again, back to that, like we can move at speed, we can adopt. Security doesn't have to be a blocker because you already have laid out what your plan is for the types of AI that you're using. I mean, Christy, to your point, like most of us went into security because we genuinely care about protecting the organizations that we work with. We want to do the right thing. It's very hard to do that if you have no visibility into what it is you are trying to protect or the risks that you're trying to mitigate. So again, it's really important that you have, whether it's a steer co, we're seeing in large organizations, it's not usually an individual, right? Even if you have someone who is like a head of AI, which I don't necessarily think is like a term that will, or a position that I think will stick forever. You need to make sure that you're all together. And this, I think, is a really big process there where the AI intake comes in, the steerco is able to understand, there's the guardrails are already in place around what is AI that we're willing to undertake or what are the risks that we're willing to undertake. And it makes you able to get to your jobs as security professionals with identifying the controls that you're going to put into place or how you're going to use the tools that are in your tool belt in order to address that risk. All of that plays in together. So hopefully that is helpful there. It's been very eye-opening as we have worked with real organizations to see them go through these processes. And when we first started doing this quite some time ago for a large life sciences company, I think we weren't really sure that it was going to stick, right? And what we have seen is that they have fully been able to uplift their processes in order to make sure that it's something that is at the heart of who they are as an organization. Again, it's aligned to business drivers. It's aligned to values. It enables security. It enables the business as they come forward with, a zillion business cases, right? You can pretty quickly get to like, okay, what are the ones we really need to worry about? I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, as we're moving through here, so I'll step into the next piece here. When we start to talk about risk assessment, the reality of this is that we kind of had a few people touch on this, but AI has been very centrally like line of business specific. We've worked with organizations that have research and development that come from academia. So like their main priority is to bring forward the newest ideas. They're really looking to access all of the technology that they can to solve a new solution. We see a very quick rise of a crown jewel that previously hasn't been documented. Like a year ago, Katie and I would ask organizations, are your models considered crown jewels of your organization? The general gist was no. That was something that, yes, it was an asset to us. And I was actually part of a panel last fall, and we were talking about it. And unless somebody had the subject matter expertise to say that this is considered our crown jewel, it was very difficult to defend that was their asset. When we talk about things like model theft or really the kind of insider threat of somebody understanding how you trained a model, the type of data that you trained it on, leaving the company and going and doing that exact same thing somewhere else. That was something that was quite interesting because from a legal perspective, how are they defending that if you haven't named it as a crown jewel for your organization and have the controls in place to say so? So we also got into quite a few discussions with specifically data scientists saying, well, who would do those things? So when we think about like data poisoning, who would actually attempt to do these things? That's just something where, again, it's not part of the culture around some of the particular use cases that we see, but now has to be part and, again, complementary to the AI strategy for the organization. Mostly what we see here as well is that the reason that we're putting in a risk assessment is to align with enterprise risk management, but also because of the fact that when we do start to establish controls, there's such a backlog of the use cases versus who actually has had security review this as part of their architecture review, who's actually done the opportunity of doing a threat mapping against the particular use case, that by doing a risk assessment, we're able to better allocate the limited resources that we already have in security to an appropriate level of scoring. Is this internal? Is this something that is leveraging a decision tree where we've got more visibility than some of the generative use cases that we see, as well as when we start to make declarations about those principles that we reflected on that are also core to like the NIST AI risk management framework. Those are things where if you are saying that now and you are going back and having to defend or provide artifacts to your audit future given, that's going to be extremely difficult to justify if there's not a level of alignment with your enterprise risk. And I know that we're getting a little close on time here. So the last thing that Katie and I have worked on, I have a bunch of resources listed here, all from the perspective of about a couple of years ago, we were going through and really just identifying and walking through where specific threats sit against those use cases. We're at a point now where there's a level of repeatability to this, which is the probably greatest thing of us spending so much time here, is that you are able to, based on the particular use case that you're going through, begin to identify what particular threats could we map to speed up this process so that it isn't an individual review every time. I know we had the earlier piece session on the OWASP top 10 for LLMs. There's actually timing on their V2 should be out at the very beginning of October. So a lot of these things are available to us today when we talk about like threat modeling and going through architecture review. For those specific use cases, we were going through and identifying really how could we even detect these different tools that we could use, different frameworks for red teaming that could really show us this particular threat model. I'm sure folks are familiar with Pirate, which came out of Microsoft, NVIDIA's red teaming framework. But as we continue to move through this, there was also publication from the likes of the OWASP AI security group around their threat matrix, which would show you specific threats across each stage of the AI lifecycle. And all of these things are really to allow us to map out the risk, understand our real exposure, and also evaluate what degree of protections we need, where we have mitigating controls, where we get greater comfort into the point of deployment. And at the end of the day, that's going back to the earlier example of security's role is to continue with the safeguards that we have, understand potential motivation for some of these attacks and the relative risk. But for most of the use cases that we're seeing today, there should be a level of repeatability so that not every time a use case is coming through, everybody has to treat it all the same. It's very much so based on the risk appetite of the organization. How core is AI to the strategy of the technology organization? All those really key places where security can be a proponent of AI adoption, not solely the one saying we can't move any farther. I don't know, Katie, if there's anything else you would add there.
I mean, I think that one of the most dangerous things that we can do at this point in time is to think to ourselves, there's nothing different about AI security. We, are secure by design. We really understand our, SDLC processes. They're super secure. One day, I think we will get there where AI is just integrated into all the things that we're doing, and we will have uplifted all of these policies and processes. But where we are at right now in time, and I can say this definitively from working across almost every industry when it comes to securing AI, we cannot take this for granted. We need to understand the unique threats. We need to be able to do the threat modeling. We need to think like bad actors think if we are going to be able to prevent them from doing bad things within our organization. We used to be just scared, right, that nation states would come in and they would take our IP and they would go make it their own and they'd make money off of it. But now we really need to give thought to the fact that, gosh, they can take our stuff and they can poison the well behind. They can degrade our brand by messing with our AI models and our training data. And those are things that you only know when you have dug into your unique use of AI and made sure that you're calling out to your leadership teams where it's appropriate to be like, hey, this is different than what we have done previously. We have an opportunity here to do the right thing for our organization. And that's what this whole journey is about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd add for some organizations where they are looking at a much smaller set, like there are special publications like the NIST 800-218A that are really just to complement application security. Those are areas where it gives somebody the allowance to understand some of the potential controls that they could have if they're not yet in a place to do all of the work that we just outlined. That gives them just an initial look, as well as just talking from the perspective of some of these are just so complementary to the needs of other parts of the organization. We've had clients where they've said, we have so many people using individual versions of this that now we're into licensing problems. There's a complement to that with the need for inventory from our side. So, just as we're looking out, there's just so much room for collaboration to gain visibility and control here. But yeah.
We are consultants. We love to talk, so we are inevitably out of time. But I'll open to questions. Christy and I will be around afterwards if anyone wants to stop and chat with us. Yeah. Rob, do you have anything for us?
I do.
Do we have time?
Questions? Yeah, just a few questions. Anyone in the audience want to ask a question first? Raise your hand. Anyone?
There's
Where? Someone?
there's Ben in the back corner.
Oh, Sven. Hiding from me. Thank you.
So a lot of the red teaming that has happened with models, I've heard companies complain to me like, oh, we red teamed our model and we got a pile of data and we don't know what to do with it. Like it's not actionable. Like it's just, we get back just 50,000 points of how our model screwed up and what are we going to do? Do you have any recommendations for situations like that, or how have you seen this?
Yeah, I mean, our teams have been looking at some of the ways that we can restrict, especially with red teaming, the types of prompts that we're using. And it goes back to like the awareness piece. So if it is something where we're talking about either, say, fine tuning the model or training further, that's one piece. But I think the reality is that most organizations are looking from also an adoption standpoint. So that's where we get like the convergence of, is it security? Is it safety? Is it really just talking about the robustness of the model, not the brittleness of the model? So from an example from one of our experiences with this has been actually coming back and having some prompts that we are training. So that like prompt engineering level. So it's more on the human side that we're going out across organizations. I know this isn't crazy to think about, but from the perspective of that, as we really deploy across an enterprise, we're trying to provide those security safeguards in a way that you don't think of it as security, but more so think about enablement to do your job. That is definitely a huge piece of it. So we've even gone so far as to have, say, prompts that are kind of pre-populated for them to pull from within our own organization. So this doesn't solve everything, but it is something to help with the human side.
Anyone else in the audience? Got to be someone more. Just raise your hand. Oh, hold on. Let me. Hold on. We have virtual people online that need to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. You've given us a lot of information. You guys have done a lot of work. A lot of activities have been performed. And I'm just wondering, and you may have said it already, where is all of this leading? I see a great opportunity to coalesce all of this information into a grand strategy. And so from your perspective, where does all of this lead? What position does it position your organization?
Yeah, maybe I'll start and then have Christy layer on. I think where all of this is leading is to, and I'm talking about not just our conversation here, but to the broader conversations that we've all been a part of here at the summit. We have so much opportunity in front of us to harness this immense power, and not to be cheesy, but we all know with great power comes great responsibility. And so I think it leads to us being able to be less siloed organizations that are working and teaming together towards a realistic end, like not some academic thing, not just to answer the IT auditors, which by the way, are asking lots of questions of us lately, but really bringing us to a place where our organizations are stronger and able to move faster because of AI. And we are able to position security, which is often looked at as a cost center, right, as an enabler of being able to move these products to market. And in that, we have the ability to really empower our security teams in a way that just did not exist before. And that's what I'm hopeful, as you guys take away from this session something, it is that you have the ability to do that, and you have the ability to influence that in order to make sure that as your organizations are adopting AI, it takes risk into consideration, but it's not the blocker, it's the enabler. I hope that's helpful.